The night my stepbrother slapped me was the night the Alpha King decided I would never bleed alone again. The moon hung full and merciless above the northern territories, silver light spilling over wolves dressed in ceremonial black and white. Laughter echoed through the clearing like wind chimes made of glass and cruelty. Music pulsed beneath ancient trees, drums keeping rhythm with hearts that beat wild and free. But Vera Ashwood felt none of it reach her. She stood at the edge of the crowd, fingers curled tightly around the worn locket at her throat, the last thing her mother had given her before she died. The metal was warm against her skin, a small comfort in a world that had forgotten how to be gentle. Unmated. Unwanted. Unseen. Before we begin, if you love Dark Lycan Kings, forbidden mates, and stories that make your heart ache, like this video, subscribe, and step into the pack. Because these stories only get deeper from here. That was how Vera had learned to survive. Invisibility was armor when you had nothing else. She had perfected the art of becoming background noise, of existing in the spaces between other people's attention. Tonight, the lunar ceremony would seal her fate. Everyone knew it. She knew it. But knowing didn't make it hurt less. Since her father's death 3 years ago, the Ashwood house had transformed from home into cage. Her stepmother, Alara, ruled with cold smiles and whispered poison. She was beautiful in the way winter was beautiful, sharp, untouchable, capable of killing anything soft that dared to grow. Alara never raised her voice. She didn't need to. Her words were surgical, precise, designed to cut where scars wouldn't show. "You have your mother's weakness?" Alara would say over breakfast, her tone conversational, almost kind. "It's in your bones, dear. No amount of wishing will change what you are." Derek, her stepbrother, was worse because he enjoyed it. Where Alara was ice, Derek was fire volatile, unpredictable, eager to prove his dominance. He was 3 years older than Vera, powerfully built, his wolf strong enough that he'd been promised a position in the pack guard. "You're weak," Derek had told her once, pressing her against the kitchen wall when Alara was gone, his breath hot against her face. His fingers had dug into her shoulders hard enough to bruise. "Wolves like you don't deserve mates. You can barely shift. Your wolf is silent. You're defective." He'd shoved her then, watched her stumble, smiled when she didn't fight back. Fighting back only made it worse. So Vera learned to endure. She learned to make herself small, to move through the house like a ghost, to anticipate moods and adjust herself accordingly. She worked without complaint, cooking, cleaning, mending, whatever kept the peace. At night, alone in her tiny room, she would press her hand to her chest and search for her wolf. "Are you there?" Silence answered. Always silence. The pack called her broken, defective. A wolf who couldn't shift properly was worse than human. It was a mistake of nature, a bloodline contaminated. And tonight, the lunar ceremony would prove them right. Or so everyone believed. The lunar ceremony occurred once every 5 years under the autumn equinox moon. It was sacred, ancient, bound by laws older than memory. All packs from the northern territories gathered in the ceremonial grounds neutral territory where blood feuds were suspended and old magic still hummed beneath the earth. The ceremony served 3 purposes. First, to renew alliances between packs. Alphas would pledge loyalty, settle disputes, arrange strategic bonds. Politics and tradition braided together under moonlight. Second, to witness challenges. Any wolf who believed they were stronger than their current alpha could issue a formal challenge. These fights were brutal, often fatal, and binding. The lunar ceremony was the only time such challenges were permitted. Third, and most importantly for wolves like Vera, to allow fate to bind unmated wolves. The moon goddess was said to speak loudest during the lunar ceremony. Mate bonds could snap into place with the force of destiny itself. Wolves who had waited years, sometimes decades, would find their other half beneath the autumn moon. It was supposed to be beautiful. For Vera, it was a countdown to public humiliation. She had no illusions of destiny. She couldn't shift properly. Her wolf slept silent and distant, emerging only in fragments, never fully formed. The pack whispered about her. Broken. Cursed. A waste of bloodline. No wolf would choose a mate who couldn't shift. No bond would form with someone so fundamentally flawed. Still, she came. Because hope, no matter how fragile, no matter how foolish, was harder to kill than fear. The ceremonial grounds were breathtaking. Ancient oak trees formed a natural cathedral, their branches woven overhead like clasped hands. Lanterns hung from every bough, casting golden light that danced across faces painted with ceremonial marks. The air smelled of pine smoke, roasted meat, and the electric charge of gathered wolves. Hundreds of them. Alphas stood with their councils, dressed in formal regalia. Warriors wore their scars with pride. Young wolves prowled the edges, nervous and eager, hoping tonight would change everything. Vera stood alone near the food tables, trying to be invisible. It almost worked. She watched couples dance, watched unmated wolves circle each other with interest, watched Alara hold court among the high-ranking females like a queen made of frost. Derek was somewhere in the crowd, probably drinking, probably laughing with his friends about how pathetic his stepsister was. Vera touched her mother's locket again. The medal was a talisman, a reminder. "You were loved once," it seemed to say. "That counts for something." She almost believed it. Derek found her easily. He always did. His voice rang out across the clearing, loud enough to cut through music and conversation. Why is she even here? Heads turned. Conversations stopped. The music played on, but dancers slowed, attention shifting. Vera's stomach dropped. Derek shouldered through the crowd, his friends trailing behind him like a pack of hyenas. His ceremonial shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, his face flushed with alcohol and arrogance. "Seriously," Derek continued, louder now, playing to the audience, "why is the defective Omega at a mating ceremony? You can't even shift properly." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Not everyone, some wolves looked uncomfortable, embarrassed for her, but enough. Enough to burn. Derek circled her slowly, enjoying the way eyes turned, the way whispers bloomed like infection. "Look at her," he sneered, "standing here like she belongs, like any wolf would want a mate who's broken." Vera felt the heat of shame crawl up her spine, burning her cheeks, tightening her throat. But she didn't bow. She lifted her chin and met his eyes. "I have as much right to be here as anyone," she said quietly. The words cost her. Everything cost her. Derek's expression darkened. "Right? You have no rights. You're a mistake. An embarrassment." He stepped closer, voice dropping to something cruel and intimate. "Father would be ashamed of you." That was when Vera's composure cracked. Just for a moment. Just enough. Derek saw it, smiled. That was when he struck her. The sound cracked through the night like lightning splitting stone. Silence followed, absolute, suffocating. The music stopped. Conversations died. Every eye turned. Vera's head snapped to the side from the force of the blow. Pain exploded across her cheek, white-hot and disorienting. She tasted blood where her teeth had cut the inside of her mouth. The world tilted. She staggered but didn't fall. Derek stood over her, chest heaving, fist still raised, his face twisted with satisfaction and rage. "Know your place," he hissed. Vera's vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. Her cheek throbbed. The crowd stared, some shocked, others indifferent, a few pleased. No one moved to help her. Of course they didn't. She was no one, nothing, broken. And then, power moved. The air changed. Pressure built like a storm, gathering strength like the moment before thunder splits the sky. Every wolf in the clearing felt it. Dominance. Ancient. Absolute. The Alpha King stepped forward. Nathaniel of Shadowpine had ruled the Northern Territories for 32 years without mercy. He was a legend carved from stone and violence taller than most wolves, broader through the shoulders, his presence a physical weight that bent lesser wolves to their knees. Scars marked his face and hands, each one a story written in blood. His eyes were dark, calculating, capable of freezing a wolf mid-breath. He had executed traitors, crushed rebellions, negotiated treaties that saved thousands of lives. He was feared, respected, and utterly alone. He had never taken a mate, never shown interest. Some whispered he was incapable of it, too cold, too brutal, too consumed by the crown. They were wrong. Nathaniel had simply never found anyone worth breaking his carefully constructed walls. Until tonight. Until he saw Derek strike Vera. The bond didn't snap into place, not fully, not yet, but something older stirred. Something primal. A claim that bypassed logic and settled deep in his bones. Mine! The word roared through his mind with such force, he almost staggered. Nathaniel moved through the crowd like a blade through water. Wolves scattered. His council called after him, confused, concerned. He ignored them. Derek had turned away from Vera, laughing with his friends, already forgetting her. Nathaniel's voice cut through the clearing like judgment itself. Derek Ashwood. The name was a command. Derek spun, face draining of color when he saw who had spoken. Every wolf in the clearing dropped to their knees. Every wolf except Vera, who stood frozen, blood on her lip, eyes wide with shock. Nathaniel stopped 3 feet from Derek. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. Touch her again, he said quietly, each word precise and absolute. And you die. The air bowed beneath the weight of the threat. Derek's mouth opened and closed. No sound emerged. His wolf whimpered inside him, recognizing a predator so far above his station that submission was the only option. I didn't. She's just... Silence. Derek's jaw snapped shut. Nathaniel turned to Vera, and his expression shifted not soft, but careful, controlled. He studied her face, the swelling on her cheek, the blood at the corner of her mouth, the defiance still burning in her eyes despite everything. Beautiful? He thought. Unbroken. Look at me, he said gently. Vera raised her eyes to his. The world held its breath. You are under my protection now, Nathaniel continued. Do you understand? She nodded, unable to speak. He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell pine and smoke and something wild. Say it, he urged. Say you understand. I understand, she whispered. Nathaniel turned back to the crowd, his voice carrying across the ceremonial grounds. Vera Ashwood is mine. Anyone who harms her answers to me. Gasps rippled through the gathering. His council looked horrified. Other alphas exchanged shocked glances. Derek looked like he might vomit. Nathaniel didn't care. He had just publicly claimed a mate. Nathaniel unfastened his ceremonial cloak, heavy black wool, lined with silver fur, and draped it across Vera's shoulders. The garment swallowed her, warm and weighted with significance. In wolf culture, a cloak offered meant protection. A cloak accepted meant belonging. Vera's fingers clutched the fabric, overwhelmed. Can you walk? Nathaniel asked quietly. She nodded. Then we leave, now. No one dared object. Nathaniel's hand settled at the small of her back, not possessive, not controlling, but steadying and guided her through the crowd. Wolves parted like water. Alara stood among the high-ranking females, face pale with shock and calculation. Derek remained on his knees, unable to move, unable to process what had just happened. As they left the clearing, Vera looked back once. At the lanterns swaying in ancient trees, at the wolves who had watched her suffer and done nothing, at the life she had survived, at the girl she had been, and for the first time in 3 years, she didn't feel invisible. Nathaniel led her to a carriage waiting at the edge of the grounds, black lacquered wood, drawn by horses that stamped and snorted in the cold night air. He helped her inside, his touch careful, respectful. Where are we going? She asked, voice small. Nathaniel settled across from her, his eyes never leaving her face. Shadowpine Keep, he said. My home. Now yours, if you choose it. Choose. The word felt foreign. Why? She whispered. Why did you do that? Nathaniel was silent for a long moment, watching moonlight play across her features. Finally, he answered. Because I saw you try to disappear, he said quietly. I saw you stand when anyone else would have broken. I saw strength where others saw weakness. He leaned forward slightly. And I will not allow that light to be extinguished. Vera's breath caught. The carriage began to move, carrying her away from everything she had known. Into something terrifying. Into something that felt dangerously close to hope. Parteth Nan, Shadowpine Keep. Vera woke to silence so complete it felt unreal. No shouting, no slammed doors, no footsteps pacing outside her room, waiting for an excuse to hurt her. The absence of fear was its own kind of violence. She sat up abruptly, breath sharp in her chest, heart hammering against ribs that still remembered how to brace for impact. The bed beneath her was enormous, draped in dark furs that smelled faintly of pine and smoke and something wild she couldn't name. Moonlight spilled through tall arched windows, illuminating stone walls carved with ancient sigils protection wards, she realized, recognizing the symbols from her mother's old books. This wasn't her room. This wasn't any room she had ever known. Panic clawed at her ribs. She swung her legs over the side of the bed and froze. She was wearing a soft linen dress, pale silver like captured moonlight, nothing like the threadbare clothes she owned. The fabric whispered against her skin, expensive and gentle. Her injuries were gone. Vera touched her cheek, no swelling. Her tongue explored her mouth, no blood, no cuts. Someone had bathed her, healed her, dressed her. The realization sent a shiver down her spine. She stood on trembling legs and crossed to the window. Shadowpine Keep spread below her like something out of legend. The fortress was carved into the mountainside itself, stone and nature woven together so seamlessly, you couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. Towers rose toward stars so bright, they seemed close enough to touch. Courtyard fires burned in neat patterns. Wolves moved through training yards even at this late hour. Everything was controlled. Organized. Powerful. She pressed her palm against the cold glass. What have I done? A knock sounded at the door. Vera flinched hard enough to stumble back from the window. Miss Ashwood? A woman's voice, calm and respectful. May I enter? Vera's throat worked. Yes. The door opened to reveal a woman in her 40s, tall, composed, her dark hair braided in the intricate style of high-ranking warriors. She wore practical clothing, but carried herself with unmistakable authority. You're awake, the woman said gently, closing the door behind her. I'm Mara, Lady Attendant of Shadowpine Keep. I've been assigned to assist you during your stay. Shadowpine, the Alpha King's fortress. Memory crashed back into Vera all at once. Derek's slap, the crowd's silence, the power in Nathaniel's voice when he said mine, the carriage ride through darkness. I didn't agree to stay here, Vera whispered. Mara met her gaze calmly, unflinching. You are not a prisoner, Miss Ashwood. You may leave whenever you wish. The Alpha King was very clear about that. That sounded rehearsed, careful. And the Alpha? Vera asked, hating how her voice trembled. Where is he? He requested you see him when you're ready. Not before. Requested, not commanded. That alone unsettled her. Mara crossed to an ornate wardrobe and opened it, revealing clothes Vera had never owned: dresses, training leathers, cloaks in deep greens and silvers. These are for you, Mara said. Everything has been prepared. But again, you are not required to accept anything. Not the clothes, not the room, not the protection. Vera stared at the wardrobe, at the life being offered. I don't understand, she said finally. Why would he do this? Mara's expression softened with something that looked like sympathy. Perhaps, she said quietly, you should ask him yourself. Nathaniel stood on the balcony overlooking the eastern forest, arms braced against cold stone, watching dawn paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. He had not slept. He could still feel the echo of Vera's fear when Derek struck her sharp, helpless, infuriating. The emotion had hit him like a physical blow, bypassing every defense he'd spent decades building. The bond hadn't snapped into place fully yet. Not a mate bond, those were immediate, undeniable. This was something older. Something his wolf recognized, but he didn't have words for. A claim born of instinct and restraint. He had broken tradition last night, claiming a mate publicly, without courtship, without her explicit consent. Even if he'd done it to protect her, would have consequences. The council would not forgive it easily. His advisors had been waiting when he returned. Faces grave, questions sharp. You claimed an Omega who cannot shift. You publicly shamed Derek Ashwood's family. You brought an unknown into Shadowpine Keep. You've made us vulnerable. Nathaniel had dismissed them all, but their words lingered. He knew the risks, knew the political fallout, knew that claiming Vera had just painted a target on both their backs. He would do it again, every time. Because when he looked at her bleeding, defiant, refusing to break, he had seen something worth protecting, worth claiming, worth everything. Vera entered the solar with careful steps, Mara having guided her through winding corridors to this circular room at the keep's heart. Books lined every wall from floor to ceiling. A fire crackled in an enormous hearth. Windows overlooked the mountains, and in the center of the room stood Nathaniel. He turned when she entered. Up close, without the crowd and ceremony between them, he was even more overwhelming, tall enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Shoulders broad enough to block out the world, power rolling off him in waves, she could feel against her skin like heat. But his eyes, they weren't cruel, they weren't cold. They were tired. Human, in a way she hadn't expected. You're safe here, he said without preamble. Vera swallowed. Why? The question hung between them, simple and impossible. Nathaniel exhaled slowly and gestured to chairs near the fire. Sit, please. She hesitated, then obeyed. He settled across from her, and somehow the distance made it easier to breathe. I saw you, he began quietly, choosing his words with care. At the ceremony, before Derek struck you, I saw you standing at the edge of the crowd, trying to disappear. Vera's fingers twisted in her skirt. I've spent my life watching wolves, Nathaniel continued. I can read dominance, submission, fear, ambition, all the masks we wear. But you, he leaned forward slightly. You weren't wearing a mask. You were trying to vanish. And yet when Derek confronted you, when he tried to humiliate you, you lifted your chin. You met his eyes. That was stupid, Vera whispered. That was brave. She looked up sharply. Nathaniel's expression was intense, honest. You tried to disappear, he said. But you didn't break. That matters more than you know. Her fingers clenched in her skirt. You claimed me in front of everyone. Yes. Why? Silence stretched between them, filled only by the crackling fire. Then, quietly, because if I hadn't, they would have killed whatever light still lived in you. Vera shook her head, emotions warring in her chest, gratitude, fear, confusion, something dangerously close to hope. I don't want to be protected out of pity, she said, voice rough. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. He stood abruptly and crossed to the window, putting distance between them. This wasn't pity, he said, staring out at his kingdom. This was recognition. Of what? He turned, and the vulnerability in his face stole her breath. Of survival, he said. Of strength forged in silence. Of someone who refused to become cruel despite every reason to do so. He moved closer but stopped himself before invading her space, respecting the invisible boundary. You think you're weak, Nathaniel continued, voice low and rough. I know you believe it because they told you so often it became truth. But Vera, he crouched so they were eye level. When you're facing impossible odds, when the world is designed to break you, when every day is survival, lasting is victory. Something inside Vera trembled. No one had ever spoken to her like this. Like she mattered. Like she was worth defending. I can't shift properly, she whispered. My wolf is silent. Perhaps your wolf is waiting for something worth waking for? Their eyes locked. The bond hummed between them, not complete but present, a thread waiting to be strengthened. What happens now? Vera asked. Nathaniel stood, offering his hand. Now, he said, you decide who you want to become. The council chamber was colder than the stone walls suggested. 12 wolves sat around an ancient oak table, advisors, generals, political strategists, all of them powerful in their own right. Their faces ranged from skeptical to hostile. Vera stood perfectly still beside Nathaniel, heart pounding against her ribs. Rydian, commander of the Alpha King's enforcers, didn't bother hiding his disdain. He was a massive wolf, scarred and brutal, loyal to Nathaniel but ruthlessly practical. She's an Omega who can't shift, Rydian said bluntly, his voice carrying the weight of military assessment. She has no combat training, no political connections, no pack standing. She is a liability the moment enemies learn of her existence. Murmurs of agreement rippled around the table. Vera felt shame burn hot in her chest. Nathaniel didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. That liability, he replied, each word precise, endured years of systematic abuse without becoming cruel. She survived in a house designed to break her and kept her humanity intact. That is rarer than power, Commander. Rydian's eyes flicked to Vera, calculating, dangerous, not convinced. Survival and strength are not the same thing, Alpha. No, Nathaniel agreed. Survival is harder. Silas, the keep's chief strategist, leaned forward. He was older, gray-haired, his eyes sharp with intelligence. The political implications are significant, Silas said carefully. Derek Ashwood's family has allies. You publicly humiliated their bloodline. This will have consequences. I publicly stopped an assault, Nathaniel corrected. If they want consequences for that, let them come. The room tensed. A female counselor spoke up, Celeste, master at arms, her voice like gravel. The question isn't whether you had the right to intervene, she said. The question is whether this Omega can survive what comes next. Because they will test her. They will push. They will try to prove she's unworthy. Nathaniel's hand moved to rest lightly on the small of Vera's back support, not ownership. Then she will prove them wrong. Rydian stood abruptly, chair scraping against stone. This will be tested, he said, not a threat but a promise. By council, by court, by enemies who see weakness. Nathaniel nodded once. Good. The meeting dissolved into tense murmurs. As they left, Vera's hands were shaking. The decision to train 1 hour 28 minutes and 1 second, 1 hour 30 minutes. That night, Nathaniel stood beside Vera in the training courtyard, both of them watching the moon rise over distant mountains. "You will train," he said without preamble. Vera turned to him, eyes wide. "What?" "Combat with Celeste. Strategy with Silas. Politics, history, pack law, everything you need to stand beside me." "I can't." "You can," he interrupted gently. "Not to earn your place, you already have a place, but to discover what you're capable of." "And if I fail?" Nathaniel looked at her not as a king assessing a subject, not as a predator measuring prey, but as a man who understood loneliness down to his bones. "Then you will fail standing," he said, not hiding. Vera stared into the torchlight, processing. For the first time in her life, she was being offered choice. Real choice. Not between survival and death. Between who she had been and who she could become. "When do I start?" she asked quietly. Nathaniel's mouth curved not quite a smile, but close. "Tomorrow, dawn." Vera nodded. And for the first time in 3 years, she didn't feel like prey. Part Thalatha, strength forged in fire. The first time Vera stepped into the training ring, she nearly turned back. Dawn had barely broken, painting the sky in shades of steel and rose. The courtyard was already alive, with motion warriors running drills, blades clashing with controlled precision, wolves moving with brutal efficiency that made combat look like dance. Celeste waited at the center of the ring. She was taller than Vera by half a foot, muscles defined beneath scarred skin, her dark hair pulled back in tight braids. Scars mapped her arms like a history written in blood and survival. She wore simple training leathers and carried herself with the confidence of someone who had never lost a fight that mattered. "So," Celeste said flatly, circling Vera with predatory assessment, "you're the one everyone's whispering about." Vera held her ground. Barely. Other wolves had stopped their training to watch. Judgment hung thick in the air. "The Alpha's claimed mate," Celeste continued, her tone unreadable. "The Omega who can't shift. The girl who survived Derek Ashwood's fists." Each word landed like a test. Vera lifted her chin. "I didn't ask for any of this." "No," Celeste agreed, "but you're here anyway." She tossed Vera a practice blade wooden, weighted to mimic steel. Vera caught it clumsily. "I don't train broken wolves," Celeste said, louder now, addressing both Vera and the watching crowd. "I don't train victims who want sympathy. I don't train anyone who's here because someone else decided they should be." She stepped closer, eyes boring into Vera's. "I train survivors who want to become warriors. So tell me, Vera Ashwood, which one are you?" The courtyard fell silent. Vera's hands shook around the practice blade. She thought of Derek's fists. Alara's cruelty. Years of being told she was nothing. She thought of Nathaniel's words. "Survival is victory. I'm here because I choose to be," Vera said quietly. Celeste's mouth curved, not quite a smile. "Then show me." Vera lost. Again. And again. The ground bruised her knees. Her arms shook from blocking blows she couldn't counter. Her lungs burned with exhaustion that made the world tilt sideways. Celeste was merciless. Not cruel, she never struck harder than necessary, never mocked but unrelenting. "Footwork," she barked. "You're off balance." Vera adjusted, attacked, was disarmed in 3 moves. "Anticipate," Celeste instructed. "Watch my shoulders, not my blade." Vera tried, failed. Hit the ground hard enough to taste blood. Laughter echoed from the sidelines, not from everyone, but enough. Enough to burn. But Celeste never laughed. She watched, measured, corrected. When Vera fell for the 5th time in 10 minutes, Celeste crouched beside her. "Why do you keep standing?" she asked, genuinely curious. Vera wiped blood from her lip with the back of her hand, chest heaving. "Because staying down never saved me," she said hoarsely. Celeste's expression shifted not quite approval, but recognition. She stood and offered her hand. Vera took it. "Again," Celeste said. And Vera stood. It took 2 weeks before Vera managed to block one of Celeste's strikes. The clack of wood on wood echoed across the courtyard. Vera's eyes went wide with shock. Celeste nodded once. "Better." It took 3 weeks before Vera landed her first hit, a glancing blow to Celeste's shoulder that wouldn't have hurt a child. Celeste grinned. "Now you're learning." It took a month before Vera lasted more than 2 minutes in a sparring match. The watching wolves stopped laughing. started paying attention. Vera's body changed, muscles hardened, reflexes sharpened. The constant ache became familiar, then background noise, then absent. Her hands stopped shaking when she held a blade. Her stance became grounded. Something inside her dormant for so long began to wake. Silas was worse than Celeste. Where Celeste tested her body, Silas tested her mind, and the mind, Vera discovered, could bleed in ways that left no visible scars. He was in his 60s, gray-haired and distinguished, with eyes that saw through every defense and voice that could cut or comfort with equal precision. Power, Silas told her during their first lesson, is not about strength, it's about perception. They sat in his study, a room filled with maps, political treatises, and the weight of centuries of wolf politics. "You've been studying combat," Silas continued, steepling his fingers, "learning to defend your body. But here, in court, your body is the least vulnerable part of you." He gestured to a chessboard between them. "Play." Vera stared at the pieces. "I don't know how." "Exactly," Silas said. "And that's what your enemies will count on. They'll assume you're ignorant, easy to manipulate, simple to discard." He began moving pieces across the board, explaining each move with brutal honesty. "Politics is chess with lives at stake. Every conversation is a negotiation. Every smile can be a weapon. Every silence speaks volumes." Over the following weeks, Silas taught her to read between words, to recognize manipulation, to identify allies from enemies wearing friendly faces. "The court will smile at you," he warned. "They'll congratulate you, praise your beauty, welcome you warmly. And behind those smiles, they'll be calculating how to use you or destroy you." Vera learned to listen not just to what was said, but what was left unspoken. She learned that power wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was the quietest voice in the room. It happened during combat training, 6 weeks into her transformation. Vera was sparring with Celeste, not losing anymore, actually holding her own when something inside her shifted. The practice blade felt different in her hands, lighter, more natural. Her senses sharpened. She could hear Celeste's heartbeat, smell the shift in her stance before she moved, feel the air pressure change as the strike came toward her. Vera blocked it perfectly, then countered with a speed that surprised them both. Celeste's eyes widened. Again, they moved faster, harder, the dance between them becoming something more primal. And then Vera felt it. A presence inside her chest, no longer silent. A stirring. "Hello," something whispered in her mind. A voice that was hers but not hers. Ancient, wild, powerful. "I've been waiting for you to be ready." Vera stumbled, gasping. Celeste lowered her blade immediately. "What is it?" "My wolf," Vera breathed. She's there. I can feel her." The courtyard went silent. Other warriors stopped training to stare. Celeste's expression transformed into something fierce and proud. "Then it's time," she said. "Time to meet her properly." That night, under Nathaniel's watchful eye, Vera stood in the moonlit clearing behind Shadow Pine Keep. "Don't force it," Nathaniel said quietly. "Let her come to you." Vera closed her eyes and reached inward, toward that presence she'd felt. "I'm here," she thought. "I'm ready." The wolf surged forward, not violently, but joyfully. Pain and pleasure merged as bones shifted, reformed. Fur sprouted silver-white across her skin. Her senses exploded into a world of scent and sound she'd never known. And then she stood on 4 legs, her wolf form small but perfectly formed, powerful in ways she'd never imagined. Nathaniel's wolf, massive, dark as midnight, stood before her. Their eyes met, and the bond between them flared to life, brilliant and undeniable. 2 months into her time at Shadow Pine Keep, Vera found Nathaniel in the library late one night. He stood by the window, shoulders tense, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He didn't turn when she entered, but she knew he'd heard her. "You should be resting," he said quietly. "So should you." Silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, but heavy with unspoken things. Vera crossed to stand beside him, close enough to feel his warmth but not touching. "Why have you never taken a mate before?" she asked. The question surprised them both. Nathaniel was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Because I've seen what this world does to the people I care about," he said, voice rough. "I've watched wolves I loved torn apart by politics, by enemies, by the simple act of standing beside me." He finally looked at her, and the pain in his eyes stole her breath. "I swore I would never put anyone through that," he continued. Never claim someone only to watch them become a target. Never be responsible for their suffering. And yet you claimed me, Vera said softly. I know. His hand clenched around the glass. I broke every vow I made to myself the moment I saw Derek strike you. Why? Nathaniel set down the glass and turned to face her fully. Because in that moment, I realized that protecting you from the world mattered more than protecting myself from loss. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face with a gentleness that contradicted everything she'd been told about the Alpha King. You make me want to be selfish, he whispered. You make me want things I swore I'd never have. Vera's heart hammered against her ribs. What if I want to be claimed? She asked. What if I choose this? Choose you? Then you would be choosing a target on your back, choosing enemies who will use you to hurt me, choosing a life where every day might be your last. I've been surviving impossible things my entire life, Vera said, placing her hand over his. At least with you, I wouldn't be surviving alone. Something in Nathaniel's expression cracked the carefully constructed walls. The iron control, the loneliness he'd worn like armor for decades. He leaned forward and pressed his forehead against hers. You undo me, he breathed. Good, she whispered back. And for the first time, Nathaniel allowed himself to believe in hope. Part Arbara, blood choice, and the Luna rising. The attack came 3 months into Vera's transformation. She was returning from the market with Mara, guards flanking them, when the scent hit her wrong, hostile, familiar in the worst way. Derek? He stepped from the shadows with 6 wolves at his back, all of them armed, all of them wearing the cold expressions of men with nothing left to lose. Hello, sister, Derek sneered, the word dripping with venom. The guards moved to protect Vera immediately, but Derek's wolves were faster, better trained than expected. Steel clashed against steel. Screams echoed through the street. Blood-painted cobblestones. Derek lunged for Vera with a blade meant to kill. She dodged training taking over, Celesta's voice in her head, anticipate, watch the shoulders. You should have stayed broken, Derek snarled, circling her. Should have accepted your place. My place, Vera said, voice steady despite her racing heart, was never beneath you. She had no weapon. The guards were engaged with Derek's wolves. Mara was unconscious, bleeding from a head wound. Vera was alone. Just like before. Except, she wasn't the same girl Derek had beaten in the Ashwood house. You're going to die, Derek promised, and when you do, the Alpha King will know he chose wrong. He struck. Vera didn't run. She shifted. Her wolf burst free with a fury born of years of suppressed rage, of survival, of every time she'd been told she was nothing. She was smaller than Derek's wolf, but faster, smarter, fueled by something he would never understand. The will to not just survive, but to live. They collided in a tangle of fur and fangs, rolling across blood-slicked stone. Derek's wolf was powerful, experienced, brutal. But Vera's wolf was desperate. And desperation could be its own kind of strength. The battle raged through the streets of Shadowpine. Vera fought like something wild and unleashed every lesson from Celeste, every instinct her wolf had been hoarding, every ounce of rage she'd swallowed for years. Derek's wolf snapped at her throat. She twisted, raked claws across his muzzle, drew blood that steamed in the cold air. Around them, the fight intensified. More of Nathaniel's guards arrived, but so did more of Derek's conspirators, wolves, who'd allied with the Ashwood family, who saw Vera as weakness, who wanted to prove the Alpha King had made a mistake. And then, power exploded across the square. Nathaniel arrived like a storm made flesh. His wolf was enormous, black as midnight, eyes burning with primal fury. The sheer dominance radiating from him brought lesser wolves to their knees. But he didn't go for Derek. He came to Vera's side, a silent promise. I'm here. Fight. Together, they were devastating. Nathaniel's power and Vera's speed, his experience and her desperate determination, moving in sync like they'd been fighting together for years instead of months. Derek's wolves broke first, scattering into the shadows. Derek himself, bloodied, beaten, his wolf limping, tried to run. Nathaniel's voice cracked like thunder. Stop! The command was absolute. Derek's wolf collapsed, unable to disobey an alpha's direct order. Nathaniel shifted back to human form, standing over Derek with the kind of cold fury that made grown wolves weep. You came into my territory, Nathaniel said quietly, each word a death sentence. Attacked my mate, spilled blood in my streets. Derek shifted back, naked and bleeding and terrified. "She's not worthy," he began. "She is worth more than you will ever understand," Nathaniel interrupted. "And you will never breathe the same air as her again." He looked to Rydian, who had arrived with reinforcements. "Take him to the cells. He'll stand trial at the next moon." As Derek was dragged away, screaming threats and curses, Nathaniel turned to Vera. She stood in her wolf form, silver fur matted with blood some hers, most not chest-heaving, eyes still wild with battle fury. Nathaniel approached slowly, carefully, and knelt before her. "You fought," he said softly. "You didn't run. You didn't hide." Vera shifted back, naked and shaking and alive. "I'm done running," she said. Nathaniel removed his cloak and wrapped it around her shoulders, then pulled her into his arms. "I know," he whispered into her hair. "I know." She stood wrapped in furs, staring at the moon, still processing everything that had happened. He approached quietly, but she turned before he spoke, always aware of him now, the bond between them humming like a living thing. "You could have died today," Nathaniel said, voice rough with emotion he couldn't quite hide. "So could you?" Vera countered. "I've been dying slowly for 32 years, he said, stepping closer, living without purpose beyond duty, existing without joy, surviving without hope. He stopped just behind her, close enough that she could feel his warmth. "And then I saw you," he continued, "trying to disappear, trying to survive one more night, and something in me recognized something in you." Vera turned to face him. "What did you recognize?" "Someone worth living for," Nathaniel said simply. The bond between them flared not painful, but overwhelming, like lightning and starlight and every good thing Vera had never believed she deserved. "I choose you," she whispered. "Not because you saved me, not because I owe you, but because when I'm with you, I remember how to want more than survival." Nathaniel's control shattered. He kissed her, not gently, not carefully, but with the desperate hunger of a man who'd been alone too long, who'd found something precious and refused to let it go. Vera kissed him back just as fiercely, months of tension and attraction and trust finally breaking free. The mate bond completed between them with the force of destiny itself. It snapped into place undeniable, unbreakable, eternal, binding their souls, their wolves, their futures together in ways that transcended choice or logic or fear. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Nathaniel rested his forehead against hers. "You are my mate," he said, "my Luna, my equal in all things." "And you are mine," Vera replied. "My alpha, my protector, my home." The moon witnessed their vows, and the bond sang between them complete at last. The formal ceremony took place under the full moon, 1 month after Derek's attack. All the Northern Territory packs gathered once again, but this time, Vera didn't stand at the edges, trying to disappear. She stood at the center of the ceremonial grounds, dressed in silver and black, the Alpha King's mate mark visible on her neck for all to see. The mark was beautiful, an intricate pattern of moonlight and shadow, visible proof of their completed bond. Nathaniel stood beside her, hand resting at the small of her back, not possessive, but proud. The council had fought the formal recognition, Rydian had questioned, Silas had cautioned. But in the end, they'd seen what Vera had become. Not the broken Omega Derek had beaten, but a Luna who'd fought for her place and earned every scar. Celeste stepped forward first, kneeling before Vera in the way warriors kneel before their queen. "I recognize Vera of Shadowpine as Luna," she said formally. "I pledge my blade to her defense." One by one, the council followed. Even Rydian, who'd opposed her most fiercely, knelt and pledged his loyalty. "You've proven yourself," he said quietly, for her ears only. "Not through birth or politics, but through courage. That's rarer than you know." The other alphas came next, each pledging their pack's respect and alliance. Some were genuine. Others were political calculations. Vera could tell the difference now. Silas had taught her well. When Alara and Derek's family approached pale, defeated, stripped of their former status, Vera felt nothing but pity. They had tried to break her. They had failed. That was justice enough. As the ceremony concluded, Nathaniel raised their joined hands to the sky. "Vera of Shadowpine," he proclaimed, his voice carrying across the gathered packs. "My mate. My Luna. Your queen." The crowd roared their acceptance. And Vera, who had once tried so hard to disappear, stood in the center of it all and finally felt seen. Derek's trial was swift and brutal. The evidence was overwhelming. Conspiracy, attempted murder, violation of territory law, assault on the Luna. The punishment was exile, a fate worse than death for a wolf. Stripped of his pack bonds, forbidden from ever entering Northern Territory lands, marked as Omega the lowest rank, the position he'd mocked Vera for holding. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. As guards escorted Derek to the border, he turned back once, searching for Vera in the crowd. She met his eyes without flinching. "You were right about one thing," she called out, her voice clear and strong. "I am weak." Derek's expression twisted with vindication. "Weak enough to forgive you," Vera continued. "Weak enough to choose mercy over vengeance. Weak enough to let you live with what you've become." Understanding dawned in Derek's eyes, horror, shame, the crushing weight of consequences. "That weakness you mocked?" Vera said softly. "It's called humanity. You should try it sometime." The guards dragged him away. Vera never saw him again. 6 months later, Vera stood in the same library where Nathaniel had first revealed his vulnerability to her. She was different now, stronger, confident, her wolf a constant presence in her mind, the Luna mark proud on her neck. But the locket still hung around her throat. She touched it gently, thinking of her mother, wishing she could have seen this moment. "She would be proud," Nathaniel said from the doorway. Vera turned, smiling. "How did you know I was thinking about her?" "Because I know you." He crossed to her, pulling her into his arms with the easy affection of a bond fully realized. "What are you thinking?" Vera leaned into his warmth. "I'm thinking about the girl I was," she said quietly, "the one who stood at the edge of the lunar ceremony, trying to disappear, who believed she was broken, who thought survival was the best she could hope for." "And?" Nathaniel prompted gently. "And I'm grateful to her," Vera said, "because she survived long enough to become me. Because she refused to break even when breaking would have been easier. Because she stood up when Derek struck her, even though it terrified her." She pulled back to look into Nathaniel's eyes. "I'm grateful she held on long enough to find you." Nathaniel cupped her face tenderly. "I'm grateful she did too," he said, "because finding you taught me that survival isn't enough, that life without connection is just slow death, that love, real love, is worth every risk. Even the political complications," Vera teased. "Especially those," Nathaniel replied, grinning. Outside, wolves moved through Shadow Pine Keep with purpose and peace. The territories were stable, alliances were strong, and at the center of it all stood a Luna who'd earned her crown through courage, not birthright. A girl who'd learned that true strength wasn't the absence of fear, but the choice to stand despite it. Epilogue: The Girl Who Survived. 1 year after the lunar ceremony, Vera returned to the ceremonial grounds. Not as a broken Omega trying to disappear, but as Luna of Shadow Pine, mate to the Alpha King, standing tall and proud. The autumn moon hung full and silver above ancient oaks, just as it had that night. But everything else had changed. Nathaniel stood beside her, their hands intertwined, the bond between them humming with contentment and strength. "Do you regret it?" he asked quietly. "Coming here that night, standing when you wanted to hide?" Vera looked at the clearing, at lanterns swaying in the breeze, at wolves dancing and laughing, at the life she'd fought so hard to claim. She thought of Derek's slap, of Nathaniel's fury, of the words that had changed everything: touch her again and you die. She thought of every brutal training session, every political lesson, every moment she'd wanted to quit but chose to stand instead. She thought of the girl she'd been and the woman she'd become. "No," Vera said finally, turning to face her mate, her alpha, her home. "I don't regret a single moment, because the girl who survived had learned the greatest truth of all. She was never broken. She was becoming, and sometimes becoming required breaking open everything you thought you were, to discover everything you were always meant to be." The moon witnessed it all, and in the distance, a wolf howled not in pain or fear, but in triumph. The end.